My life split into before and after. Before, ordinary days that now feel unreal, like they belonged to someone else. After, endless waiting, fear, and the knowledge that inside me lies something no human should carry. For a long time, I kept silent. I told myself it was just a dream, a hallucination, some trick of the mind. But whenever my hand brushes against the scar on my chest, the truth returns like a blade. It happened. The scar is cold, almost alive, and sometimes I feel something shift beneath it, reminding me that my body is no longer mine alone. Tonight, I break my silence, not because I want pity or attention, but because some truths demand to be spoken. What happened to me was not a nightmare, it was real. And once you hear it, you'll never look at the night sky the same way again. Subscribe and hit the like button, because what I'm about to tell you is usually hidden. What they did to me was only the beginning. It started like any other day, the kind of day that slips through your fingers without leaving a mark. I woke up, brewed the same bitter coffee, and dragged myself to work. My routine was predictable. Endless spreadsheets, artificial smiles, the fluorescent lights above my head draining away what little energy I had. Nothing extraordinary, nothing that should have changed my life forever. By the time evening came, I was exhausted, that heavy fatigue that seeps into your bones. The city outside was winding down, windows glowing with warm yellow light, families gathering for dinner. I walked home with my head down, the cool air brushing against my face. My thoughts were scattered, filled with trivial concerns. Bills, deadlines, the monotony of tomorrow. There was no warning, no hint that this night would tear apart everything I thought I knew. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and dropped my bag onto the floor. My dog, Rex, greeted me with his usual boundless energy, tail wagging, paws clicking on the hardwood. I scratched behind his ears, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed onto the couch. The TV hummed faintly in the background, playing some meaningless sitcom I wasn't even watching. That's when I noticed it, the silence beneath the noise. Rex froze, his ears perked, body stiffening as if he sensed something I could not. Then came the low growl, guttural and uneasy. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I reached for the remote, but before I could even lower the volume, every light in the apartment flickered and died. The TV snapped off, the fridge went silent, and the apartment was swallowed in darkness. At first, I thought it was just a power outage. But then the air changed. A pressure, subtle but undeniable, pressed against my chest. I stumbled to the window and pulled the curtain aside. That's when I saw it. Above the neighborhood, the sky blazed with an unnatural brightness. Not the moon, not a plane. A light so intense, it seemed to bleed into the world around it, painting everything in sharp, unnatural contrast. It hovered, silent, alive. Rex whimpered and backed away, his growl replaced by a terrified whine. My body screamed at me to run, to hide, but I couldn't move. My limbs refused me, as though invisible hands had wrapped themselves around my muscles and locked me in place. I tried to shout, but even my voice was stolen. Panic clawed at my throat as tears welled in my eyes. I wasn't just frozen. I was trapped inside myself. The light grew brighter. It poured through the glass, filling the room like liquid fire. My shadow stretched and twisted on the wall behind me, grotesque and unrecognizable. My skin tingled as if charged with electricity, every hair standing on end. Then I felt it, the pull. It began gently, a subtle lift, as if gravity itself had turned traitor. My feet shifted against the floor, weightless, My heart pounded with impossible force, screaming against what was happening. I could feel myself rising, inch by inch, toward the ceiling, toward the window, now glowing like the mouth of some celestial beast. The world around me blurred, soundless, yet deafening. The dog's cries seemed to fade into nothing, replaced by a strange hum that came from everywhere and nowhere at once. My body floated upward, helpless, as the light wrapped itself around me like a cocoon. I wanted to fight, to scream, to claw my way back to the ground. But there was no ground anymore, just the light, just the hum. Just the growing realization that I was being taken. And in that final moment, before the world vanished into blinding white, one thought cut deeper than fear itself. This is not a dream. When consciousness returned, it wasn't gentle. It hit me like icy water thrown across my face. My lungs filled with a sharp, metallic taste, and I jolted awake, gasping, shivering, even though the air was still. For a moment, I thought I had gone blind. Everything around me was so white, so sterile, it blurred into a seamless nothingness. The floor beneath me was smooth and cold, like polished stone or steel. The ceiling shimmered faintly, not from any light fixtures I could see, but as if the walls themselves glowed. The brightness hurt my eyes, yet cast no shadows. It was a light without a source, eternal and oppressive. I sat up slowly, heart hammering, and that's when I realized I wasn't alone. All around me lay people. Men, women, some older, some frighteningly young. They were scattered across the floor, motionless, pale, like discarded dolls. Some twitched faintly, caught in restless dreams, while others were too still, their chests barely rising. The silence was thick, interrupted only by shallow breaths and the faint hum that seemed to pulse through the walls. My throat went dry. I opened my mouth to speak, to call out to someone, but my voice cracked into nothing. It was as if sound itself was swallowed by this place. Then, movement. At the far end of the room, a door I hadn't noticed before slid open with no sound, no mechanism. From the blinding threshold stepped figures, tall and impossibly thin. Their skin was the color of ash, smooth and reflective under the light. Limbs too long, movements too fluid, as if they glided rather than walked. And their faces. Enormous jet-black eyes, unblinking, absorbing everything. No nose, just small slits, a mouth too narrow, almost vestigial, never opening. Their presence froze me more than the paralysis back home ever could. I wanted to scream, to demand what they were, where I was. But the moment I formed the thought, I felt it. A pressure in my skull. A whisper that wasn't a sound. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language I knew. Yet I understood. The words slid into my mind like knives wrapped in silk, cold and undeniable. A chorus of voices, layered and echoing, though none of their mouths moved. Do not resist. I clutched my head, gritting my teeth as the alien language twisted into meaning. It wasn't speech, it was thought invading thought. Their presence filled my skull like an unwelcome guest, rearranging my fear into something sharper, rawer. One of the beings drifted closer, its eyes fixing on me with surgical precision. My chest heaved, sweat beading on my forehead, but I couldn't look away. Its gaze wasn't just watching me, it was inside me, peeling me open, page by page, memory by memory. Childhood flashes, my parents' faces, my home, my dog. All exposed, sifted through like scraps of paper in a storm. The others moved among the unconscious bodies, inspecting, selecting. One bent down over a man and placed its hand on his forehead. The man shuddered violently, his body arching before falling still again. Another figure was dragged away through the glowing door, leaving a faint trail of warmth in the sterile air. And then it was my turn. The being towering over me raised its hand, long and skeletal, holding an instrument I couldn't describe. It wasn't metal, not plastic, not anything from Earth. It pulsed faintly with a blue luminescence, alive, like it breathed. The voice pressed deeper into my head. "You are ready." I tried to crawl backward, but the floor seemed to grip me, holding me in place. My muscles screamed, but nothing answered. The figure leaned closer, the instrument glowing brighter, its reflection burning in those black, endless eyes. My breath caught in my throat, and then, with a sudden jolt, the world tilted. The edges of my vision darkened. I saw the figure's hand reaching for my chest, the tool humming softly. The last thing I registered was the impossible certainty that, whatever they were about to do, it would change me forever. Darkness swallowed me whole. They strapped me down before I fully understood what was happening. The table was not like any operating table I had seen in hospitals. No stainless steel gurney with sterile sheets. No clusters of human surgeons whispering over fluorescent lamps. This table was a slab of some dark, glassy substance that drank light. Straps of a supple, almost living polymer closed over my wrists and ankles with a soft, final click. My chest rose and fell with ragged breaths that the straps did nothing to ease. The room beyond the slab was a cathedral of instruments. Rows of crystalline containers sat in niches like relics. Inside, organs hovered in viscous fluids, suspended and humming with a faint inner glow. Other tables bore figures with their skin peeled open in surreal, clinical artistry tubes and filaments threaded into flesh, tiny capsules embedded where organs should be. There was no frenetic panic, no frantic bustle. The beings moved with the economy of predators. Their motions were precise, as if every second had been measured and readjusted for centuries. One leaned over me, close enough that I could smell something, if you could call it smell-like ozone after thunder. Its fingers were instruments. Its touch, when it touched my jaw, was not rough, but utterly indifferent, like a cartographer tracing a map. It moved with deliberate calm that made my terror ricochet into a new dimension. Awe mixed with dread. They recorded everything. Thin filaments descended from the ceiling and kissed my temples. Tiny nodes mapped along my sternum. A soft, almost clinical light tracked the beat of my heart, graphing it as a line that pulsed in colors beyond comprehension. They spoke to each other with the same wordless voice that had invaded my skull before thought currents that braided meaning and command. I could feel their observations as if their thoughts were cold glass against my brain. A screen, if that's what it was, flickered to life, and images cascaded across its surface. Cross-sections of anatomy I had never learned existed. Matrices of energy and tissue bonded in geometries that made me nauseous with wonder. They compared patterns, nodded with those endless dark eyes, and then selected from a tray a tiny, iridescent capsule. It shimmered like oil caught in sunlight, a thing that seemed less manufactured and more grown. The instrument approached. They made no attempt to numb me. I do not know whether they thought anesthesia unnecessary in a body vibrating with terror, or whether their physiology made such measures meaningless. The first incision, if that is what it was not with a blade, but with focused pressure, a cool compression that parted flesh like water. I felt it as a hollowing, a small, cold absence forming beneath my ribs. Pain, when it came, did not bloom so much as it was unveiled. A precise, star-bursting pain that mapped itself through my nerves and then settled into a thrumming ache. They introduced the capsule. It slid into that hollow, like a key sliding into a lock. and for one suspended heartbeat, I felt something align in unfamiliar geometry seeding itself against my own organs. Then came the sutures, woven not with thread, but with filaments that sang when they touched flesh, tiny electric tones that threaded tissue together and sealed without blood. The creatures monitored the process, as if checking a machine, adjusting pressure here, sending a cool pulse there, whispering with those invasive minds. As they worked, I caught glimpses of other experiments. A woman on the next slab convulsed as a lattice of filaments fused to her spine. An old man's eyes opened for a moment to reveal pupils that reflected the ceiling like black moons, then closed again as if nothing had happened. The creatures were methodical, their hands never shaking, indifferent to the human noise of pain and pleading. One of the beings turned its head, and for a moment, its gaze settled on me in a way that felt like recognition. Not of me, but of purpose, as if I were not a subject, but a solution. Then the change began in earnest. The capsule pulsed inside me, tiny, coherent beats that did not match my own heart. They were colder, higher frequency little shocks that threaded alongside my blood and settled against tissue like a second pulse. With every pulse, I felt currents that were not mine, electric whispers that made my vertebrae hum, frequencies that opened dormant corridors of sensation. I heard no, felt static at the edges of my perception, a new register of the world unfurling like a map. Beyond sensation came cognition. Fleeting images, places I had never seen, angles of stars, diagrams in a logic that was not language flashed through me, and with them, a new capacity to sense fields, the low hum of the room's instruments, the faint discharge from an appliance miles above the surface, the whisper of a phone left on a table in a distant house. I recoiled, shocked at how quickly my awareness expanded. This organ was not passive, it was a receiver. Somewhere in that expansion, the pain reached a peak so bright it felt like my skull splitting. And then, abruptly, there was a cessation like a circuit being opened. The humming slowed, the threads retracted, and a cool, efficient pressure closed over the place of insertion. Someone, something, pressed its hand to my chest and sent a dampening tide through my nerves. The immediate agony receded into a raw, aching aftertaste. But with the pain came voices, or rather, layers of them. Not the invasive mental language of the aliens, but snippets of recordings, patterns overlaid with intention, sequences of clicks, tonal shapes that resolved into the memory of a night sky, a pattern that matched the light that had taken me. They were not words I could parse, but they were messages, signatures of an intent that thrummed through the new organ and into my mind. My heart slowed. My breath came in ragged, sucking pulls as I tried to reconcile the alien code, now threading my perception with the remnants of my old self. Panic, then a strange, clinical curiosity settled over me. The beings adjusted dials I could not see, whispered into the air, and my vision shivered like heat haze. Voices, faint, layered, inhuman, overlapped, until they became indistinguishable from the hum of the place. They spoke of phases and calibration, of receptive thresholds and atmospheric attunement. The instrument on the tray clicked softly, a sound like a metronome marking an unseen tempo. And then the world narrowed to a single sensation, exhaustion so complete it felt like falling through velvet. My eyelids, heavy as stone, dropped. The last coherent thing I heard was a chorus of thought, not hostile now, but clinical and patient, threading into the hollow where my old certainty lived. Stand by. Integration sequence initiated. Darkness closed like a lid. I slipped, finally and utterly, into oblivion, still tethered to a being that had rearranged me. The last thing in my mind was the echo of voices, not in my ears, but in the place where something new had been planted, whispering, calibrating, and waiting. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was the cracked paint of my bedroom ceiling, the faint outline of water damage in the corner, the same imperfection I had stared at countless sleepless nights. For a moment, I thought it had been a nightmare so vivid it stole hours of my life. My heart leapt with desperate relief. But then I sat up. The clock on my nightstand glowed red. 11:43 p.m. I remembered being taken at just after 10. Barely 2 hours had passed. Yet what I carried in my mind felt like a lifetime. Sterile halls, black eyes, the pulsing capsule inside my chest. And then I felt it. A sharp, aching throb beneath my sternum. I pulled at my shirt and froze. There it was, just below my ribs, a scar the length of a finger, pale, puckered, fresh. The skin around it glowed faintly under the dim lamplight. My fingers traced it, trembling. The flesh was warm, but deeper still, something pulsed with a rhythm not my own. A foreign cadence, separate from the beat of my heart. I stumbled out of bed, nearly tripping over Rex. He was cowering in the corner, tail tucked, ears flattened. His eyes were locked on me, not with affection but with fear. When I took a step toward him, he whimpered and scrambled beneath the bed, as if hiding from a stranger. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and opened the camera. I needed proof, anything to confirm I wasn't unraveling. The screen reflected my pale face, the sweat on my forehead, and that scar. I snapped photo after photo, as though a handful of digital images could anchor me back to sanity. The next morning, I told my family. They laughed nervously, then frowned when they saw how serious I was. My mother touched the scar, whispering that I must have hurt myself sleepwalking. My father suggested stress. My sister rolled her eyes and muttered about too much late-night TV. None of them saw the tremor in my voice, the way my hands refused to stay still. So I went to a doctor. Under the fluorescent buzz of the clinic, I laid on the examination table, while the physician prodded my chest with cold fingers. He squinted at the scar, ordered an ultrasound, and frowned at the screen. Nothing abnormal, he muttered, confused. No foreign objects, no irregular growth. Heart's fine, lungs are fine. But I knew he was wrong, because every night after that I dreamed. Not ordinary dreams, but returns. I was back in that white room, surrounded by others who never woke. The faces of the beings hovered above me, their thoughts pressing into mine. I smelled the sterile air, heard the hum of machines not built by human hands, and always I felt the throb in my chest echo louder, as if the dreams were not memories, but ongoing transmissions. One night, I woke with blood on my sheets, thin doricles that had leaked from the scar as though something beneath had pushed outward. Another night, I woke gasping, convinced that my heart had stopped, only for it to lurch violently back to life. My family began to whisper when they thought I wasn't listening. He's different. He's unstable. He's imagining things. They didn't see me sitting awake at 3 a.m., clutching my chest, while the glow from the scar pulsed faintly in the darkness, synchronized to something beyond the walls of my house. Days bled into nights. At work, I couldn't focus. Computers flickered when I passed by. Monitors glitched into static for a heartbeat. Co-workers complained their phones lost signal whenever I walked into the room. I said nothing. I couldn't explain. I barely understood myself. But deep down, I knew one thing with terrifying certainty. I hadn't been returned. I had been released. Released with something inside me. Something they wanted to test in the open world. And as the scar ached and the dreams grew sharper, I realized I wasn't alone in this body anymore. They had marked me, and they were still watching. At first, the changes were subtle. So subtle I thought I was losing my mind. A faint vibration in the air whenever I passed near an electrical outlet. The flicker of lights overhead, not when storms raged or circuits failed, but when I entered the room. Radios crackled with static when I walked by. Phone screens dimmed, then surged, then dimmed again. Technology bent itself in small, uneasy bows to my presence. I tried to ignore it, pretend it was coincidence, pretend it was stress, exhaustion, anything but the truth. But the truth was louder than denial. One night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt it, the organ in my chest stirring like a restless animal. Not a heartbeat, but a surge. My chest tightened, breath seized, and then came a vibration that rippled outward. The lamp on my nightstand flickered, pulsed, and then shattered with a pop. Shards of glass scattered across the floor. My heart slammed against my ribs, but beneath it, the alien rhythm continued, calm and steady. Rex howled from the hallway, refusing to come closer. From that moment on, I began to sense things no human should. The hum of power lines, like a song buried in the clouds. The buzz of electricity trapped inside walls. Even the faint magnetic pull of Earth itself. I could hear it all, like a choir that had always been singing, but now chose me as its audience. But it wasn't just machines. I began to feel people. Their moods, their intentions, carried a weight in the air, faint currents that brushed against the edges of my perception. I knew when my sister was about to lie, even before she opened her mouth. I sensed a coworker's anger building long before his voice rose. At first, it was intoxicating, like having a secret map of the world hidden beneath reality's surface. And then it turned terrifying, because my heart, the new heart, the organ beating beside it, did not always obey me. Sometimes, in the middle of a conversation, it would pause. I would feel it stop, my vision narrowing, blood roaring in my ears. For a few seconds, silence in my chest. Then, suddenly, it would start again, harder, faster, as though rebooting itself. Each time it happened, I felt less like a man and more like a machine being tested. People noticed. They noticed even before I did. "You've changed," my mother whispered one evening, her eyes lingering not on me, but on the faint glow beneath my shirt. "You look the same, but something's different." Neighbors stopped greeting me. At work, conversations ceased when I walked into the room. Colleagues shifted away, muttering about the way monitors flickered around me, the way their phones lost service. My friends stopped calling. It wasn't long before isolation set in. And yet, with isolation came clarity. I realized this organ was not a random implant. It was a tool. It was tuned to something. The more I focused, the more I could reach. I could predict when storms would break, when the lights across town would fail, when an engine would sputter before it even coughed. At first, it felt like foresight. Then I realized it wasn't prediction, it was connection. The organ was syncing me with systems that were never meant for human senses. The scar pulsed when storms rolled in, glowing faintly as lightning tore across the sky. My body vibrated when satellites passed overhead. I began to notice patterns in the interference, like coded signals nested in noise. It was communication data, perhaps flowing through me whether I wanted it or not. The realization struck with an icy finality. This wasn't a gift. It was surveillance. I was not merely carrying an alien organ. I was carrying a receiver. Every night, the dreams returned with sharper detail. The white rooms, the black eyes, the pressure of foreign thoughts piercing mine. Only now I sometimes woke, not in my bed, but standing at the window, staring at the stars. My scar burned, my body humming like a tuning fork, as if I were waiting for a signal to call me back. I told myself I was still human. I repeated it like a prayer, but deep inside, I knew the truth. I was no longer just me. I was part of them. The first time I saw the light again, it was not like the bright, sterile halo that had taken me that night. It was distant, a thin tooth of pale white ripping the sky above the apartment block across the street. My chest reacted before my mind did. A hot, distant ache, the organ thrumming under my ribs like something waking from a long sleep. I walked to the window and pressed my forehead to the cool glass. The street below was still, a couple arguing in low voices, a courier cycling by, a child on a scooter. Ordinary life moved in its oblivious orbit. Then the tooth of light sharpened, and the hum arrived, not merely inside my head now, but threading the air like a wire pulled taut. My breath shortened. A pressure gathered behind my eyes. For a moment I thought I could deny it, that I could patch the seam and hold myself together with will. But denial had become a thin film over something irreparable. The organ, whatever it was, answered the sky. It started in a way that was almost tender, a slow, surgical synchronization, a microsecond here, a tiny phase shift there, and then a cascade of sensation that made me stagger. Everything around me translated into signal. The street lamp's transformer sang in low bass. The neon sign across the road hissed in diapason. A dozen phones pinged with the same tone. Folded into a harmonic, my chest recognized and amplified. Patterns unfolded like maps, coordinates, frequencies, names without words. I felt it as a conversation not meant for human ears. The organ pulsed in time with it, routing stray electromagnetic whispers into a coherence my brain could, at last, grasp. Images flashed behind my eyes, not my memories, but overlays. Schematics of lattice devices, arrays of light swirling into formations. A grid of tiny dots aligning into a path. The sense that someone was sketching on a transparency placed over the city. I could have tried to shut it off. I tried. I clamped my hands over my chest, squeezed, as if to smother the pulse, to choke the signal into nothing. For a moment the world thinned, and I tasted copper. My heart hammered, then slowed, and in that half-second, where blood and silence met, I understood something terrible and precise. The organ did not merely receive, it reacted. It reacted to attention. It reacted to presence. When the light above the block widened, when the pattern in the sky folded into itself like a petal closing, the organ sang louder. Its pulses changed my pulse. It changed my breath. It reached out. Outside, on the roof of the building across the lane, a figure stood. For a blink, I thought it was only a trick of the light, a shadow cut against the glow. Then it moved, and my lungs collapsed with recognition that had nothing to do with familiarity and everything to do with ownership. The same elongated silhouette I had seen in the white room, the same impossible limbs that had bent like reeds. It raised something slender to its face, and for one manic instant my mind filled with the alien chorus, a tidy phrase of assessment, of confirmation. They were marking me again. I felt a cold clarity. The organ pulsed in a new register, thrumming a pattern that matched the figure's signal. That pattern was a lock, and the lock had found its key. The pulse in my chest arranged itself, aligning frequencies, and a doorway opened in my mind, not of sight, but of instruction. I understood, as if understanding were a physical thing. a schedule, an interval, a call and response. They had left me in the world to gather, to listen, to become a node in a network that spanned farther than any bridge of steel. Panic rose, a tidal surge that crashed into the rational shore. I stumbled away from the window, hands shaking, and grabbed the keys to my car as if keys could move me across the sky and out of the circuit. But the organ pulsed, and the car's dashboard flared to life, GPS reorienting to coordinates I had never entered. My phone vibrated with a map I hadn't opened. The house lights dimmed into a reply. My walls hummed like bees. The entire neighborhood answered, as if my chest were an antenna and the city a chorus. This was no random assault. It was calibration. In the days that followed, the calls came. Not human calls, not with voices, but with the pressure of proximity. Streetlights blinked in patterns I could read. Trains sang on tracks far away, and I could tell where their brakes would fail minutes before the announcer reached the platform. An airplane's path overhead traced an algorithm my organ translated into the rhythm of insect wings. I could predict outages, eruptions of electromagnetic noise, the particular frequency a government scanner would sweep at noon. Each revelation was a new chain around me. I tried to use it. If the organ was a receiver, perhaps it could also be a weapon. I thought of warning people, of stopping accidents, of turning this curse into something redeeming. But the network wasn't benign. The signals I decoded carried intention. They carried directives. Sometimes I woke on my knees in the street with a phone clutched to my palm and a message sent I didn't remember composing. My body had moved with a purpose. My conscious mind could not always approve. Doors closed around me. Authorities took to tracking anomalies. Social media stitched snippets of my odd presence into rumor. The few who stayed close watched me with the wary eyes of those near a wound that bleeds unseen. Friends vanished. Lovers left. Even my family, who had once been my anchor, crossed the street to avoid the house that hummed. Isolation grew like barnacles on a hull. And yet, the most excruciating truth was simpler and more intimate. The organ was not theirs only. It had become part of me. It taught me to listen, to map, to obey frequencies like a second language. The line between my will and the signal's instruction blurred, until sometimes I could not tell whether the choice to act had been mine or theirs. One night, under a moon that did not look like the one I had known, the sky tore open with the same white wedge. It hovered, patient, the city a soft instrument beneath it. The organ in my chest thrummed in a cadence that matched my breath. I felt the world fold into a single point and understood that this was not the end of an experiment, but the beginning of deployment. I thought they had released me. I thought being returned meant freedom. But standing there, chest heaving, hands stained with the echo of my own attempts to control a body that now belonged to a larger circuit, I realized the cruel geometry of truth. They hadn't given me back my life. They had given me back a body wired to their purpose. I pressed my palm against the scar, feeling the alien warmth, the precise beat that neither fully belonged to me nor to anything I could name. I thought they had released me. But now I know. I have become their experiment.